Today's sermon is called Mud in Your Eye. Can everyone hear me properly?
Yes.
All right. Let's open quickly with prayer. Heavenly Father, as we turn our attention now to your word, we pray that you will give us hearts to want to know the truth and courage to be willing to follow the truth. For you, Lord, indeed, you are the true Lord, maker of heaven and earth, master of men. Lord, help us to do as right in your sight. In Jesus' name we ask these. Amen. All right. So 3 weeks ago, you listened to a sermon called Runcible the Fatuous. It was about a man who had a chance to do something great and blew it. And we looked at people in the Bible who were like that. For example, the rich young ruler. He was given the opportunity actually to join Jesus' inner circle, but he passed up on it because money was more important to him. Well, he perished with his money almost 2,000 years ago. We looked at Matthias. Matthias was actually added to the 12, numbered with the 12 by the other apostles. But as far as we can do, he did absolutely nothing. There's no further mention of him in the Bible. There's no record of him, reliable record of him doing anything. And then, of course, there was King Saul. Saul was actually appointed king. The kingship was given to him, and God told him that he would have established his kingdom forever if he'd obeyed. It would have fundamentally altered history. As we pointed out, the Messiah would not be son of David, he would be son of Saul. Okay? But Saul blew it all by disobedience and ended up dying an ignominious death. That was 3 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, we talked about how to present the opportunity to people with the hope that they will act on it if we give it in the proper fashion. Understanding, of course, that God has to work in their hearts. The best we can do isn't going to guarantee that people will come, but we still want to do the best we can. And so we looked at the example of Jesus with the Samaritan woman at the well of Sychar and how he approached her and gave her every chance to act on the opportunity, which she did. And then last week, we looked at Nicodemus. We looked at a man who actually did act on the opportunity presented to him, who's somebody who sided with Jesus, even though he had a lot to lose. And we saw that it took him some time to come on board. He thought things through carefully, examined the evidence. He didn't come right away. But in the end, he realized it was the most important thing he could do. Okay. So look at yet another man from the Bible with an opportunity. One of my favorite characters actually from the Bible. And we're going to look at what he did and how to act on the opportunity. So far, we've looked from the point of view of giving the opportunity. And now we're going to look in detail at how someone should respond. And this character is the man in John chapter 9, the man who was born blind and Jesus healed him. Let's see how his story unfolds. We start at the beginning of John chapter 9. We read, "Now as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, 'Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?'" And the mindset of the mindset of the disciples here is that if this person, if things have gone badly for him, it has to be a visitation for sin. Okay? Either he sinned himself, and that's why he was born blind, or his parents sinned, and that's why they're given a blind child. And that was a kind of dualistic thinking that was common in those days, but it was wrong. Okay? Jesus told his disciples that neither this man nor his parents sinned. Okay? That's not what happened. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes bad things come upon people because of their sin. If you compare the man in John 9 with the man in John 5, you see a very different thing. That man in John 5 was the one who was lying by the pool, waiting to be put into the water for all those years. And after Jesus healed him, He came to him and said, see, you have been made well. Go and sin no more, lest the worst thing come upon you. So in that case, we can assume that, at least in part, that man's bad lot was due to sin. But in this case, it wasn't. So we can't always assume that it was. Okay? But you can imagine how the people in the day must have thought of him. This guy was blind. He's forced to be a beggar. He has no other way to support himself. And people are thinking, wow, you must be a bad sinner because you did these things. Okay? So let's look at what happens. First thing we notice is that Jesus approaches him. Okay? It's Jesus who approached him. This man didn't even call out to Jesus. He's blind. He may not even have known Jesus was there. But Jesus takes the initiative to approach him. And that's how it always has to be. Unless God acts to raise your interest somehow, you're not going to come, no matter how clever our words are. However, we do note that in John 12:32, Jesus guaranteed that he will draw all people to himself. So everybody gets that opportunity. What do we do with it? Well, Jesus approaches him just as he did with the woman at the well of Sychar. That should be a lesson to us, not to always just wait for an opportunity to fall in our lap. Sometimes we have to make the opportunity. If we see a good one here, like the woman at the well, she was there, the man born blind. These are opportunities, and Jesus acted on them. Okay? Now, it was a Sabbath. Okay? We find out later in the chapter that this was happening on a Sabbath, and he's heading for a showdown with the Pharisees. They're not going to like the fact that Jesus healed on the Sabbath, because their understanding is that you're not supposed to do any work on the Sabbath, and healing somebody would be work. So, he comes to the man, and when he had said these things, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And he said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. Now, let's look at that part in the yell there. He spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay, mud in his eye. Why? What's the point of that? You'll find a lot of commentators have some very innovative and clever symbolic meanings to this. But the one that seems to me to be the actual case, if you know what was going on in those days, Jesus railed against the Pharisees because they made all kinds of rules beyond what the Bible said. And the intention was to keep people from violating biblical rules. But in reality, they were making all kinds of rules that's just not possible even to follow. And they're replacing the law of God with the traditions of men. And Jesus would frequently clash with them over this. Now, one of their rulings, and it illustrates how silly this could get, was the question that was asked of the rabbis: if a man spits on the ground on the Sabbath, did he violate the Sabbath by doing work? So these rabbis thought and thought and thought and thought, and then finally they concluded that if he spits on the ground and his saliva lands on a rock, then he hasn't done any work. But if his saliva lands on the dirt, on the ground, it'll make mud or clay, and then he has done work, even though the act is exactly the same. I think part of the thing here, Jesus is mocking that kind of approach. And he's saying, look, in case you don't realize I'm healing on the Sabbath, and that's not bad enough, look, I'm spitting on the ground and making mud, see? Pick on me. So the fellow does that. He acts in obedience. He goes and washes in the pool of Siloam. This is actually the pool of Siloam. It had 5 porticos in that pool, and this was one of those many, many things that critics for a long time said, see, the Bible's wrong. There's never a pool with 5 porticos. That's just ridiculous. And so archaeologists actually dug up the pool, and it had, guess what, 5 porticos. So you can still go and see the pool of Siloam today where this happened. The blind man there went and he washed in the pool of Siloam, and he came back seeing. Amazing miracle. Okay? And people ask him, they're wondering what's going on here. And the neighbors, those who previously seen their response said, is not this he who sat and begged? Some said, this is he. Others said, he's like him. He says, I am he. Therefore they said to him, how were your eyes opened? He answered and said, a man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So I went and washed and I received sight. Oh, this interests them? They said to him, where is he? He said, I do not know. I mean, how would he? He was still blind when he left to go to the pool of Siloam. Once he washes, Jesus is not around. He doesn't know where. Okay? And you wonder, what's his thinking at that point? Okay, this man called Jesus healed him. He's not here anymore. I've got my eyesight. What is he going to do now? How does he take what happened to him? Okay? Maybe he'll be happy to have his eyesight back, and that's it. Yeah, that sometimes happens. We saw elsewhere in Luke chapter 17, 10 lepers calling upon Jesus for healing. He told them the same kind of thing, go and present yourselves to the priests. Off they go, and on the way, bing, their leprosy disappears. Jesus healed them all. Only one bothered to come back to Jesus to say thank you. The other 9, well, we got what we wanted, off we go. How is this fellow going to take it? Is he going to be like those other 9? Okay, I got what I wanted. On with life. It happens in real life. Often people pay no attention to God, even mock the concept of God until something goes wrong. Then they become very willing to listen. But then once the problem is past, they stop listening. I had a friend who's Christian. His parents were very, very dismissive of Christianity. They mocked it. They resisted all of his efforts to bring them to Christ, to preach the gospel. They just made fun of it. And then one day, his mom was diagnosed with cancer. And lo and behold, suddenly they became very, very willing to listen. Even asked for prayer, were willing to pray. Sounded like everything was going on. And you know what? The cancer went away. And my friend's thinking, wow, God showed his power. They called upon him. He helped. Surely they'll take this seriously. But no, once they have what they want to have, we don't have to pay attention to God anymore. We got what we wanted. How is this fellow going to react? Well, he's not going to be allowed to walk away. He's not going to be allowed to walk away because something like this is certainly going to get to the news of the authorities. Okay? They brought him who formerly was blind to the Pharisees. Now it was a Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also asked him again how he had received his sight. He said to them, he put clay on my eyes and I washed and I see. Okay? What are the Pharisees going to do at this point? Wow, great power from God, amazing, thank God, glory to God. No. Therefore, some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God because he does not keep the Sabbath. But that's some of them. Others do look at the evidence and say, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there was a division among the people. And there's a division, you're going to have to go one way or the other. There's no third way. You're either with him or you're him. And this fellow is going to be called to make that choice. They said to the blind man again, what do you say about him because he opened your eyes? Same evidence we all have, although for you it's much more personal. What are you going to say about him? Is he not from God because he does not keep the Sabbath? Or must he be from God because God will not do such a work through a sinner? And the fellow has to think about it. And he gives, the first answer he gives is this. He is a prophet. It's true, he is a prophet, though he's a lot more than that. But it's a reasonable first guess. He really, now he's being forced to think about it. He's not able to just put it on the shelf like those lepers. He's in a position where he has to think about who Jesus really is. Okay? Well, people against Jesus are not going to like that. And so what do they do? But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight. That's going to be the first thing, the accusation of lying. There are people who do not like Christ, who don't like God in general, and who will become hostile if you side with Jesus. No question about that. An accusation of lying is one of the things you might run into, and that may not be all. Okay? So they have a quasi-judicial hearing. They call the parents of him who received his sight, And they asked him, saying, "Is this your son who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" Interestingly, by the way, as an aside, Jewish law of Moses, required 2 or 3 witnesses to establish a matter. How many witnesses do we have here? 2. The minimum requirement, the father and the mother. Okay? The mother's a woman. Okay? So those who say women were not allowed to give testimony in those days, it says it's not, but it's simply not true. I mean, you can see that right in front of your face. And people see it and they still say, because they don't think about what they read. Okay? So how do the parents answer? His parents answered them and said, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind. By what means he now sees, we do not know, or who opened his eyes, we do not know. He is of age, ask him. He will speak for himself." Okay? His parents said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had agreed already that if anyone confessed that he was the Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age, ask him." Okay? Isn't that a nice thing? This is family. His parents are basically leaving him hung out to dry, throwing him under the bus. Wow, my son, born blind all these years, all I can do is beg. He has his eyesight. I should be up over the moon about this. But no. My social status, that's more important to me. Okay? So I'm just going to leave him all by himself to deal with these people. I don't want to be thrown out of synagogue. And unfortunately, that also can happen. There are people who come to Christ, and as a result, it ends up a great friction with the family, a great friction. And this is why Jesus said in Luke 12:52-53, "For from now on, 5 in one house will be divided, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. Father will be divided against son and son against father, mother against daughter and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law." There's division in the families, and maybe some of you have encountered that. Now, it's not because we're hostile to them, understand. What it is they become hostile to us. Where there's a split, where a Christian leaves his family, it's not because it's his choice. It's because they turn on him. We don't see them as enemies, but they turn on us. Prime example, for example, would be the Watchtower, the Jehovah's Witnesses. One of the ways they keep people in is they have this teaching, mandatory teaching, that if you renounce the Watchtower, you give up on its teachings, you don't believe it, if you become a Christian, for example, you'll be disfellowshipped. Nobody who's a Jehovah's Witness is allowed ever to talk to you again, including your wife, your father, your mother, your children, your brothers, your sisters. They impose that very, very, very heavy price to try to prevent you from leaving. And it's a serious, serious decision on the part of Jehovah's Witness, which one they're going to go with. We never do that. We never say that, hey, if you're not Christian, we're going to cut you off. We don't do that, but they do. And this is partly, at least, what this fellow was facing. The parents aren't going to answer on his behalf. So they again called the man who was blind and said to him, "Give God the glory. We know that this man is a sinner." Can you think of any modern day analogy to this? A modern day parallel? Okay? And I'll say here it is. It's a bit not so obvious to see the connection, but it's there. These are the Pharisees. These are the religious authorities. These are the experts. Give God the glory. We know that this man is a sinner. We're the experts. You're not. We're the scholars. You must accept what we say. Okay? We know better than you. Okay? That kind of gambit is going to be tried all the time. It is not difficult to find experts who will tell you that Jesus didn't rise from the dead, that Jesus didn't exist, and so on. And people who are enemies of the cause of Christ will go to these experts and say, don't think for yourself. Don't go where the evidence leads. Just submit to the opinions of the experts. And unfortunately, we see that in Christian circles too, on other issues where you're not supposed to think for yourself. You're simply supposed to believe what the pastor says from the pulpit or what the evangelical scholars have to say. Don't think for yourself. Well, you have to think for yourself. And this man in John 9 had to think for himself. He was being forced to take a stand. It might have been very comfortable to say, okay, yep, okay, you're the experts. I'll just go with that. Okay? Parents would have been really happy, stays in the synagogue. But the thing is, he cannot forget the evidence. And his answer is quite interesting. He answered and said, whether he is a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I know, that though I was blind, now I see. Okay? I can't get into an argument with you about your claims and your expertise, but this I know is the evidence. Though I was blind, now I see. He opened my eyes. Okay? And the Pharisees once again come to him and say, then they said to him again, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? Okay? Why do they keep asking? Are they hoping that they're going to uncover some little detail that they can pick on further? Are they thinking, wow, maybe there's a secret technique and we can learn it? I don't know. But this fellow is getting really exasperated by now. And because he's being asked the same question over and over again. You often find that actually in arguments with skeptics, that they're asking them questions, you spend a long time giving them detailed answers, convincing answers, irrefutable answers, and then they ask the same question again as if you hadn't said anything at all. So this fellow's getting exasperated. He answered them, I told you already and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? I wonder if there's some little snide content there when he said that. They get angry. Okay? And their answer is funny when you think about it. They say, then they reviled him and said, you are his disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. We know that God spoke to Moses. As for this fellow, we do not know where he is from. Okay? Now, it'd be interesting to ask them, okay, you know that God spoke to Moses. How? How do you know that? Okay, this was like 1,400, almost 1,500 years in the past to you folks. You weren't there. You read accounts of miracles. You weren't there to see them. You're here to see this one. Okay? So what kind of answer? We don't know where he's from. What does that have to do with anything? And the man, he's like really starting to see how shallow and empty their arguments against Jesus are. He said, the man answered, said to him, why, this is a marvelous thing that you do not know where he is from, yet he has opened my eyes. Now we know that God does not hear sinners. But if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, he hears him. Since the world began, it has been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one who was born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. Okay? So it's interesting to trace his reasoning, okay, as he's answering them. Right? Lost the page. Okay. It's interesting to trace the reasoning there. Okay, exposing the bad reasoning. Now he has 3 steps of logic. Okay, number 1, we know that God does not hear sinners. Okay, he's being forced now by the Pharisees to take a stand. He can't kind of sit on the fence, and he starts reasoning. Okay, we know that God does not hear sinners. Okay? Point number 2, what he did went far beyond what any prophet had done. This particular miracle was something that has been unheard of since the world began. Okay? And at that point, he must internally be thinking, my initial answer, this guy's a prophet, it's not good enough. It's not enough of an answer. There's something more here than that. And then step 3 of his chain of logic, if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And that is irrefutable. How can the Pharisees answer this train of logic? Well, they can't. Okay? They do what's called an ad hominem attack. Okay? They can't refute it. They don't refute it. The answer and said to him, "You were completely born in sins, and are you teaching us?" And they cast him out. You were completely, you're the bad guy. How dare you teach us? That's not a logical argument. It's the fallacy called ad hominem. Attack the man. And then get rid of the evidence. Cast him out. Hide him. Okay? Blind yourself. Turn away from the evidence. Okay? Pretend it's not there. And people do that all the time to avoid facing the reality of God. We see it in Matthew 28. Remember when Jesus had risen 3 days earlier, third day earlier, he was on the cross and he was being mocked by these very same people, chief priests and elders, and saying, yeah, save yourself. If you save yourself, we'll believe in you. And they thought they got rid of the problem. And now here come the tomb guards saying, that guy you thought you got rid of, yeah, he's come back. He did save himself. And they said, hey, if you save yourself, we'll believe in you. He saved himself. Did they believe? No. They buy and pay for a lie. Tell them his disciples came at night and stole him away while we slept. Same attitude you see in John 9. We're not going to, the evidence is there. The evidence is conclusive. We're just going to not look at the evidence. We don't want to look at it. And you see it today as well. Litoli footprints. Yeah? A trail of fossilized, completely modern human footprints found in a fossilized at a layer of tuff that's supposedly from the time period of Australopithecus. Our distant ancestors that supposedly evolved into us across the period of about like 3 million years. How can you have modern human footprints at the same time as Australopithecus? Well, these tracks by themselves are more than enough to debunk. So they buried them. They went back and said, we got no answer. So, they're eroding away. Let's just bury them. And from then on, we're going to say it was done by Australopithecus. We know it wasn't. We have complete modern human footprints with an inline big toe. Australopithecus had a foot like a chimpanzee with an opposable big toe. This was not made by Australopithecus. Yet to this day, they will keep telling you that. They know it's not true, but they will still hold to that in order to avoid facing God. Okay? As a famous doctor once said about people like this, the very powerful and the very stupid have one thing in common. They don't alter their views to fit the facts. They alter the facts to fit their views. Okay? So it happened then, it happens now. And you're going to find people do that who just will not look at the evidence. Okay? But this guy did, and as a result, he was thrown out of the synagogue, and now Jesus comes back to him. Once again, Jesus finds him. Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and when he had found him, okay, and now, at his initiative, the fellow's ready to believe. He realizes he may not know the whole story of who Jesus is, but he realizes he's more than a prophet. He's willing to listen, and Jesus is ready to harvest. And he actually identifies himself. He is no mere prophet. He is the Son of God. Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and when he had found him, he said to him, do you believe in the Son of God? Well, what does that mean, the Son of God? Well, we know what it meant because he said it earlier. And the Jewish leaders sought to kill him because he not only broke the Sabbath, he said that God was his Father, making himself equal with God. And we see even in more detail in John chapter 10, the Jews are getting ready to stone him. Jesus asks, what good work are you stoning him? He says, it's not for good work, it's for blasphemy, because you, being a man, make yourself God. And he says, is that a problem? Yeah. I've been sent this into the world by the Father, and you say I'm blaspheming because I said I'm the Son of God? I guess they're saying, when he says I'm the Son of God, they take that as you making yourself God. So calling yourself Son of God is a claim to deity. Very clear claim to deity. So clear that they were ready to stone him over it. And look at his answer. He said, if I do not do the work, but if I do, though you do not believe me, believe the works. Okay? So very clear. I'm not just saying stuff. I'm giving you irrefutable proof. Go where the evidence leads. But why should we do that when so much easier just to kill you and get rid of this inconvenient thing we don't want to know about? So when he says that to this man, the fellow will know exactly what it means. He's claiming deity. And the man says, he answered and said, who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him? Okay? He doesn't have full understanding, but he's willing. Just tell me who it is. Okay? Because I've seen enough to accept your word. Show me who is the Son of God, and I will believe. And Jesus said to him, you have both seen him, and it is he who is talking with you. Very clear claim to deity. And this fellow was not allowed to sit on the fence about this, who had to have integrity, either go the way of the Pharisees and ignore the evidence, cover it up, stay in good social graces, keep the family happy. We couldn't do that. Just as there are some people who are Jehovah's Witnesses who turn to the truth regardless of the cost. This is the fellow had the integrity to do that. And when Jesus presented himself, he said, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. Okay? So he may have been tossed from the synagogue, but he has been given an entrance into the kingdom of heaven, okay? Into eternal life, into abundant life that starts now. And that's a good trade. And we see it elsewhere in the Bible too. Sometimes it doesn't even take that nearly that much evidence to convince people. Some people have such an integrity, go where the evidence leads, to check it out, that a little bit is enough sometimes. There's an interesting story of Nathanael in John chapter 1. The following day, Jesus wanted to go to Galilee, and he found Philip and said to him, follow me. Now, Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Philip. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, we have found him of whom Moses and the law and the prophets, and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. Well, what's Nathanael's answer? Can anything good come out of Nazareth? A bit of a cynical answer there, sarcastic and kind of running down Nazareth, which is a very teeny little town, so like a equivalent of a Hoboken or something like that. Can anything come out of Nazareth? Philip said to him, come and see. At least check out the evidence, okay? Come and see. You may think nothing's good to come out of there, but at least come and see. Okay? Nathanael approached after he'd been invited. Okay, he's skeptical. He's invited to check out the evidence. Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him and said to him, behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no deceit. Nathanael said to him, how do you know me? Okay? Maybe I'm full of deceit. How do you know? Okay? Jesus answered and said to him, before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you. Okay? Jesus offered evidence. Okay? It's not a big deal of evidence, just showing that he knows something he couldn't possibly know. Before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you. Nathanael answered and said to him, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. Wow. It didn't take a lot to convince Nathanael. Even Jesus seems a bit surprised that it was so easy. Answered said to him, because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? You will see greater things than these. Okay? Even Jesus knows, you want your faith to be well grounded. So it's great, Nathanael, that you believe on that basis, but don't worry, I'll be giving you more evidence so you can be sure. Okay? Just want to check it out. Okay? People with the integrity to go where the evidence leads, regardless of the cost. That's why I like that guy in John chapter 9. Okay? Which, once again, brings us to our question at the end, what about you? Okay? Like that man born blind, you've been given that mud in your eye. You've been given proof. Okay? Through the last couple of years we've been here, you have been presented plenty of irrefutable evidence. A lot more than Nathanael had. And more than enough for you to know that Christianity is true, that Jesus is the Son of God, and that eternal life comes through him, condemnation if you do not come to him. What are you going to do with that evidence? Are you going to leave it on the shelf and stay sitting on the fence? Are you going to write Jesus off as just, well, the prophet, obviously a special guy, but that's it and move on? Are you going to succumb to that temptation? Say, well, I'll find experts who tell me what I want to hear, and I'll just go with that. Okay? Or are you going to consider the evidence, consider the case, mull on the evidence, consider it fairly, as this man did, and then come to the realization that you have to believe because it's the truth? Are you going to be like those foolish chief priests and elders in Matthew 28, who had the evidence, who know it's true, and just chose to ignore it? Like the evolutionists who have to hold on to human evolution because they don't want to face the reality of God, and therefore they're faced with irrefutable evidence that their belief in human evolution is false. Simply choose to ignore that, bury it, and keep holding on to it? Or will you be the ones who accept the truth, turn to Jesus, and receive life more abundantly, and in the world to come, eternal life? Again, the choice is yours. Don't put it off. Let us pray.